The transport vessel Meridian's edge hummed through the void between star systems, its cargo hold filled with the usual mix of traders, refugees, and those seeking new lives among the outer colonies. The ship's automated systems maintained their constant vigilance, scanning every passenger with mechanical precision that had kept the galaxy's trade routes secure for over 3 centuries. In seat 47C, Sarah Chan adjusted her worn travel bag and stared out the viewport at the endless sea of stars. To any observer, she appeared perfectly ordinary, a mid-30s human woman with calloused hands and tired eyes, wearing the simple clothes of someone who worked with their hands for a living. Her identification papers marked her as a mining engineer from the Kepler system, relocating to find work in the Vega colonies. The ship's primary scanner array, a sophisticated Altarian-built system worth more than most planets' annual budgets, performed its routine sweep of the passenger compartment. Electromagnetic signatures, biometric readings, and threat assessments flowed through its quantum processors in microseconds. Each passenger received their classification: merchant class, refugee status, academic researcher, mining technician. When the scanner reached Sarah Chun, something extraordinary happened. The system's initial reading came back clean. Human female, no weapons detected, stress levels normal for interstellar travel, classification. Civilian, threat level, minimal. But then, deep within the scanner's most advanced subroutines, something triggered a secondary analysis protocol that hadn't activated in over 50 years. The scanner detected an anomaly so subtle that even the ship's AI almost missed it. Sarah's cellular structure showed microscopic irregularities that didn't match standard human physiology. Her bone density was precisely 2.3% higher than the average for her age and body type. Her muscle fibers exhibited a cross-linked protein structure that occurred naturally in only 0.001% of the human population. Most tellingly, her neural activity patterns showed a symmetry that suggested cognitive processing capabilities far beyond normal parameters. The scanner's threat assessment algorithm began recalculating. 3 seats behind Sarah, Zektar Voss, a Centaurian arms dealer with legitimate travel documents, but illegitimate business practices, noticed the ship's scanner array had been running longer than usual. The soft blue glow that indicated routine scanning had shifted to an amber warning light that most passengers wouldn't recognize, but Voss's experience in less-than legal enterprises had taught him to notice such things. Captain Morrison, a gruff former military officer who prided himself on running a clean ship, received the automated alert in his quarters. The message was brief, but unprecedented. Anomalous passenger detected. Reclassification in progress. Recommend enhanced scrutiny. In 30 years of commercial transport, Morrison had never seen such a message. Pirates, smugglers, and the occasional terrorist. Those were threats his systems could identify and categorize. This was different. This was the scanner admitting it didn't know what it had found. Sarah felt the change in the ship's atmosphere before anyone announced it. The subtle shift in the air recycling system, the almost imperceptible increase in the scanner's energy output, the way the ship's AI began routing more processing power to threat analysis. Her enhanced senses, carefully hidden beneath layers of genetic camouflage, detected patterns that no normal human could perceive. She knew they were beginning to suspect. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 15 years, she had successfully hidden among normal humans, using carefully crafted identity documents and a lifetime of practice to appear completely ordinary. She had mastered the art of walking without her enhanced strength, making her footsteps too light, of speaking without revealing the tactical analysis, constantly running in the background of her thoughts, of looking at people without letting them see the threat assessment she unconsciously performed on everyone she met. But technology had advanced. The latest generation of scanners could detect genetic modifications that previous systems would have missed entirely. What had once been invisible was now beginning to show through her carefully maintained disguise. In the ship's security office, Chief Security Officer Yans studied the scanner readouts with growing concern. The system's confidence in its initial civilian classification had dropped from 99.7% to 67%, and was still falling. Whatever the Sarachan was hiding, it was significant enough to trigger protocols that Yans had only read about in theoretical security manuals. The scanner continued its deep analysis, probing layers of Sarah's physiology that she had hoped would remain hidden. It detected trace elements in her bloodstream that suggested exposure to advanced combat stimulants, though the concentrations were so low they could only be residual. Her cardiovascular system showed adaptations consistent with high-altitude training, yet her travel records showed no time spent on high-gravity worlds. Most concerning of all, the scanner found microscopic scars on her hands and arms that formed patterns. Not random injury patterns, but precise geometric arrangements that suggested surgical modification or advanced training techniques. The system's database contained no reference for such scarring in civilian populations. Yans made the decision to implement enhanced monitoring protocols. Micro-drones, no larger than insects, began positioning themselves throughout the passenger compartment. Additional sensors came online, analyzing everything from Sarah's gait to her breathing patterns to the way she held her head when she thought no one was watching. Sarah sensed the increased scrutiny immediately. The thermal signatures of the micro-drones were invisible to normal human vision, but her enhanced optical processing could detect their heat patterns against the cooler background of the ship's hull. She counted 7 drones within her immediate vicinity and estimated at least a dozen more throughout the passenger compartment. They were closing in, but they still didn't know what they were dealing with. As the Meridian's edge continued its journey through the void, two forces moved toward an inevitable confrontation. The ship's sophisticated security systems, designed by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, worked to uncover the truth about Passenger 47C. Meanwhile, Sarah Chun, whose real name was something entirely different and whose origins lay in humanity's most classified experiments, prepared for the possibility that her carefully constructed new life was about to come to an end. The scanner's final analysis was still hours away, but both sides knew that when it completed its work, nothing would ever be the same. In the cold vacuum of space, surrounded by alien technologies and unknown threats, humanity was about to reveal one of its most carefully guarded secrets. The question wasn't whether Sarah's true nature would be discovered. The question was what would happen when it was. The ship's dining hall buzzed with the usual mixture of conversations in a dozen different languages as passengers gathered for the evening meal. Sarah moved through the serving line with practiced normalcy, selecting foods that would provide optimal nutrition while avoiding anything that might interact poorly with the synthetic compounds in her modified bloodstream. She had learned long ago to eat like everyone else expected her to eat, with the slightly hurried efficiency of someone used to working long hours, pausing occasionally to rest her fork as if her jaw needed the break that normal humans required. Every gesture was calculated to reinforce the illusion of ordinary humanity. At table 17, she sat across from elderly Mrs. Patterson, a genuine mining engineer's widow who was relocating to be closer to her daughter. The conversation flowed easily. Sarah had memorized enough technical details about or extraction to maintain her cover, and Mrs. Patterson was lonely enough to appreciate any friendly discussion about the work her late husband had loved. The new compression techniques they're using in the Vega system are fascinating, Sarah commented, carefully modulating her voice to sound interested but not expertly knowledgeable. I'm hoping to learn more about them once I arrive. What she didn't mention was that her enhanced cognitive processing had already analyzed the technical specifications she'd briefly glimpsed on another passenger's datapad 3 tables away. Her modified neural architecture could absorb and integrate information at a rate that would have seemed supernatural to baseline humans. 3 decks above, Captain Morrison stood in his security center watching the feeds from the dining hall. The micro-drones had mapped Sarah's movement patterns, analyzed her social interactions, and recorded her biometric responses to various conversational topics. Every data point was fed into the ship's increasingly sophisticated threat assessment algorithms. Captain, Security Chief Yans called from his workstation. You need to see this. The scanner had completed its deep tissue analysis, and the results were unprecedented. Sarah Chin's bone marrow showed cellular structures that didn't exist in nature. Her nervous system exhibited conduction speeds that exceeded human norms by significant margins. Most disturbing of all, her brain showed activity in regions that baseline humans never accessed, with neural pathway configurations that suggested capabilities far beyond normal human intelligence. "What the hell are we looking at?" Morrison muttered. "Sir, I think we're looking at someone who isn't entirely human anymore," Yans replied. The scanners classified her as a genetic enhancement variant, military grade, threat classification unknown. The system is recommending immediate quarantine and contact with colonial authority. Morrison studied the data streams flowing across his screens. In his years of military service, he had encountered enhanced soldiers from various species: Altarians with cybernetic implants, Centaurians with bioengineered strength modifications, even a few humans with basic physical augmentations. But this was different. The modifications were so extensive and so sophisticated that they suggested a level of biotechnology that officially didn't exist. "Has she done anything threatening?" Morrison asked. "No, sir. Her behavior has been completely consistent with her stated identity. She's been helpful to other passengers, polite to the crew, and hasn't shown any interest in restricted areas of the ship. If anything, she's been a model passenger." That was what worried Morrison most. In his experience, the most dangerous individuals were often those who could hide their capabilities most effectively. Down in the dining hall, Sarah finished her meal and excused herself politely from Mrs. Patterson's company. As she walked toward the passenger quarters, she allowed herself a moment of careful observation. The micro-drones were maintaining their surveillance pattern, but she noted a subtle change in their positioning. They were no longer just monitoring. They were preparing for potential action. Her enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversations between crew members that confirmed her suspicions. Phrases like enhanced monitoring and unusual readings told her everything she needed to know. The scanner had found enough anomalies to trigger serious concern. In her small passenger cabin, Sarah sat on the narrow bunk and considered her options. She could maintain her cover and hope that the ship's systems wouldn't dig deep enough to uncover the full extent of her modifications. She could reveal partial truths and claim to be a worker with minor genetic enhancements, common enough in the outer colonies to be unremarkable. Or she could prepare for the possibility that her secret was already blown and plan accordingly. She closed her eyes and activated meditation protocols that most humans would have found impossible. Her heart rate slowed to 40 beats per minute. Her breathing became so shallow it was barely detectable, and her brain waves shifted into patterns that would confuse any monitoring equipment. To external sensors, she would appear to be in deep sleep. But inside her enhanced consciousness, Sarah was wide awake and thinking faster than any normal human could comprehend. Her real name was Sarah Vanguard, though even that wasn't the name she had been born with. She was part of humanity's most classified military program, Project Prometheus, an experiment in creating enhanced soldiers who could operate independently behind enemy lines for extended periods. The modifications weren't just physical and mental. They included sophisticated genetic camouflage that allowed enhanced operatives to blend seamlessly with baseline human populations. The war that had created the Prometheus program had ended 12 years ago, but its veterans lived on in the shadows of normal society. Some had integrated successfully into civilian life, using their enhanced capabilities in legitimate careers. Others had become mercenaries, criminals, or worse. A few, like Sarah, had simply tried to disappear entirely. But disappearing was becoming increasingly difficult as technology advanced. The scanners that could barely detect first-generation enhancements were now sophisticated enough to penetrate even the most advanced genetic camouflage. It was only a matter of time before all the Prometheus veterans were exposed. A soft chime from the ship's intercom system brought Sarah out of her meditation. Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the passenger quarters with an announcement that sent a chill down her spine. Attention passengers, we have detected a minor technical anomaly that requires additional security screenings. Beginning tomorrow morning, all passengers will undergo enhanced biographical verification. This is a routine precaution and will not delay our arrival schedule. We thank you for your cooperation. Sarah opened her eyes, her enhanced vision immediately adjusting to the cabin's low lighting. Through the thin walls, she could hear other passengers discussing the announcement with varying degrees of concern and annoyance. But she knew what enhanced biographical verification really meant. They were going to dig deeper into every passenger's background, cross-reference their stories with military databases, and look for inconsistencies in their documented histories. Sarah's cover identity was sophisticated enough to fool most routine checks, but if they started looking specifically for Prometheus operatives, they would eventually find traces of the program. Standing up from her bunk, Sarah moved to the small porthole and looked out at the stars streaming past. Somewhere among those distant lights were worlds where other Prometheus veterans were living quiet lives, trying to forget the things they had been trained to do. Soon, all of them would face the same choice that Sarah was facing now. Run, hide, or fight. In a security center, Captain Morrison was already composing a message to Colonial Authority headquarters. The text was brief, but would trigger immediate attention from military intelligence. Transporting possible enhanced military asset. Request immediate guidance on detention and transfer protocols. Passenger exhibits characteristics consistent with classified enhancement programs. Recommend intercept at destination. As he prepared to transmit the message, Morrison didn't know that he was about to become part of a much larger story, one that would reveal humanity's hidden capabilities to the galaxy and change the balance of power among the stars forever. The scanner had done its job. It had identified Sarah Chun as something more than civilian. Now the real questions would begin. The message transmission from the Meridian's edge reached Colonial Authority headquarters within 6 hours, bouncing through a series of quantum relay stations before arriving at the Secure Intelligence Division on Mars. The automated routing systems flagged keywords like enhanced military asset and classified enhancement programs, immediately escalating the communication to the highest levels of military command. General Patricia Hawkins read the message 3 times before reaching for her secure communicator. As Director of Special Operations Command, she was one of only 17 people in the galaxy who knew the full scope of Project Prometheus. The fact that one of their operatives had been detected using civilian transport was more than concerning. It was potentially catastrophic. "Give me everything we have on Sarah Chun," she ordered her aide, "and run a deep background check on everyone aboard that transport vessel. If they found one of our people, I want to know who they are and what their capabilities might be." Within minutes, classified files began appearing on Hawkins' secure display. Sarah Vanguard, her real name, had been one of their most successful operatives. Enhanced at age 19, she had spent 8 years conducting deep reconnaissance missions in hostile territory, gathering intelligence that had helped turn the tide of the war. Her psychological profile indicated exceptional adaptability and a strong moral compass, which made her an ideal candidate for reintegration into civilian society after the conflict ended. But her military record also showed something that made Hawkins' blood run cold. Sarah's enhancement package hadn't been standard. She was part of the Omega series, 12 operatives who had received the most advanced modifications the program could produce. While regular Prometheus operatives were enhanced soldiers, the Omega series were designed to be living weapons, capable of single-handedly taking on entire enemy installations. If Sarah felt threatened enough to reveal her true capabilities, the Meridian's edge and everyone aboard it could be in serious danger. Aboard the transport ship, Sarah had spent the night in careful preparation. She had identified 17 different ways to disable the ship's security systems, mapped the location of every crew member and passenger, and calculated optimal routes through the vessel that would minimize civilian casualties if violence became necessary. Her enhanced mind worked through scenarios with mechanical precision, preparing for contingencies she hoped she would never need to implement. But she also spent time doing something that her handlers had never expected from an Omega operative. She worried about innocent people. Mrs. Patterson, who had shared stories about her grandchildren during dinner. The young Altarian couple in the cabin next to hers, clearly on their honeymoon and glowing with happiness. The ship's junior engineer, barely out of training, who had been so excited to explain the new drive systems to anyone who would listen. These weren't military targets or enemy combatants. They were just people trying to live their lives, and Sarah's presence on the ship had put them all at risk. The enhanced biographical verification began at 0800-hour ship time. Passengers were called alphabetically to the security office, where they underwent detailed questioning about their backgrounds, travel purposes, and personal histories. Most emerged looking mildly annoyed by the inconvenience. A few seemed nervous, which was normal for people carrying minor contraband or traveling on slightly irregular documentation. Sarah was scheduled for 1,400 hours. She used the morning to implement a plan she had been developing since the previous evening. Moving through the ship's common areas, she began what appeared to be casual conversations with other passengers and crew members. To anyone watching, she seemed to be simply passing time and making friends. In reality, she was conducting a sophisticated intelligence operation. Her enhanced cognitive abilities allowed her to process microexpressions, vocal stress patterns, and behavioral cues that revealed far more about people than they realized. Within 3 hours, she had identified which crew members were genuinely concerned about passenger safety versus those who were simply following orders. She had determined which passengers might panic in an emergency and which ones would remain calm. Most importantly, she had located the ship's most vulnerable systems and identified the people with access to them. Security Chief Yans watched the surveillance feeds with growing unease. Sarah Chen's behavior wasn't overtly threatening, but there was something disturbingly purposeful about her movements through the ship. She seemed to be mapping their operations, studying their capabilities, and positioning herself for some unknown objective. "Captain," he reported to Morrison, "I think she knows we're onto her." Morrison studied the tactical displays showing Sarah's movement patterns. "Any sign that she's planning something aggressive?" "No, sir, but that might be even more concerning. Someone with her apparent enhancement level wouldn't need to show aggressive intent until it was too late to stop them." At 1,355 hours, Sarah presented herself at the security office 5 minutes early, carrying herself with the relaxed demeanor of someone who had nothing to hide. She knocked politely and entered when invited, taking the indicated seat across from Morrison and Yans with a slight smile. "I understand you have some additional questions about my travel documentation," she asked pleasantly. Morrison activated the recording system and placed a small scanner on the desk between them. This was a more advanced unit than the ship's primary systems. Military-grade equipment designed specifically to detect genetic modifications and enhance capabilities. "Just routine verification, Ms. Chun. Can you confirm your full name and place of birth?" Sarah Elizabeth Chun, born in the Kepler mining colonies 34 years ago. The scanner immediately registered elevated stress indicators, but that was normal for people undergoing security questioning. What wasn't normal was the way Sarah's biosignature seemed to shift and stabilize almost instantly, as if she was consciously controlling her physiological responses. "And your current occupation?" "Mining engineer, specializing in deep shaft extraction or processing systems." Yans leaned forward slightly. "Can you explain the unusual cellular modifications that our scanners detected during routine screening?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but Morrison caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear or surprise, but calculation. She was evaluating the situation, determining how much they knew and what her options might be. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied calmly. "I've never had any genetic modifications beyond the standard colonial vaccinations." The scanner registered that statement as definitively false, but Sarah continued speaking before either officer could respond. Although I should mention that I was exposed to some unusual radiation signatures during a mining accident several years ago. The medical treatment I received might have left some unusual traces in my system. It was a plausible cover story, and Sarah delivered it with exactly the right mixture of concern and cooperation. But Morrison had been studying the classified intelligence reports from Colonial Authority, and he knew they were dealing with something far more significant than a mining accident survivor. "Ms. Chun," he said carefully, "I'm going to need you to remain here while we verify some additional information with Colonial Authority. This is just a precautionary measure." Sarah nodded understanding, but both officers noticed that her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. She was still sitting relaxed and cooperative, but now she looked like someone who was ready to move very quickly if necessary. "Of course, Captain. I'm happy to cooperate with whatever procedures you need to follow." As Morrison reached for his communicator to contact headquarters, none of them knew that their conversation was being monitored by intelligence services across 3 different star systems. The Colonial Authority was tracking the situation to protect their classified assets. The Altarian Security Council was analyzing the data because enhanced humans represented a potential threat to galactic stability. And deep in the outer territories, other Prometheus veterans were receiving coded warnings that their hidden lives might soon be exposed. The biographical verification had revealed nothing definitive, but it had confirmed everyone's suspicions. Sarah Chan was definitely more than she appeared to be, and the next few hours would determine whether that revelation would lead to a peaceful resolution or something far more dangerous. In the security office, 3 individuals sat in apparent calm, each knowing that they were balanced on the edge of events that could reshape the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy forever. The communication from Colonial Authority arrived 18 minutes later, transmitted on the highest priority military channels with encryption codes that made Captain Morrison's hands shake slightly as he read them. The message was brief and unambiguous. Subject Sarah Chun identified AS classified military asset. Detain immediately. Authorization Omega 7. Expect military intercept at destination. Extreme caution advised. Morrison looked up at Sarah, who was sitting patiently in the security office, apparently reading something on her personal data pad. To all appearances, she was a completely ordinary woman waiting for bureaucratic procedures to run their course. But the authorization code Omega 7 was one he had hoped never to see. It indicated a threat level that required immediate military intervention. "Ms. Chun," Morrison said carefully, "I'm afraid we're going to need to place you in secure quarters for the remainder of the journey." Sarah looked up from her data pad with an expression of mild confusion. "Though I hope this won't delay my arrival in the Vega system. I have a job interview scheduled." The casualness of her response was almost more disturbing than overt resistance would have been. Morrison had expected argument, demands for legal representation, or at least some sign of distress. Instead, Sarah seemed almost relieved that the pretense was finally ending. They escorted her through the ship's corridors to a secure cabin normally used for transporting high-value cargo or dangerous materials. The room was small, but comfortable, with basic amenities and a bed. More importantly, from a security perspective, it had reinforced walls, a single controlled entrance, and no access to the ship's computer systems. "I'm sorry about this, Ms. Chun," Morrison said as they prepared to leave her there. "We're just following proper procedures." Sarah smiled at him with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Captain, you're doing exactly what you should do to protect your ship and passengers. I respect that." After they sealed the door and activated the monitoring systems, Morrison and Yans retreated to the security center to review their options. The secure cabin would hold any normal prisoner indefinitely, but their growing understanding of Sarah's capabilities made both men deeply uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir," Yan said quietly, "what exactly are we dealing with?" That authorization code suggests something far beyond standard military enhancement. Morrison had been wondering the same thing. His clearance level gave him access to general information about various military programs, but Omega 7 classifications were restricted to the highest levels of command. All he knew for certain was that they were transporting someone who required the attention of elite military units. What he didn't know was that in her secure quarters, Sarah was conducting a final assessment of her situation. Her enhanced hearing allowed her to monitor conversations throughout the ship. Her tactical training let her analyze the security measures that had been put in place, and her combat optimization protocols were calculating the probability of various escape scenarios. She could break out of the secure cabin within 30 seconds. The reinforced walls would slow her down for perhaps 3 minutes. The ship's security systems would delay her by another 5 minutes at most. After that, she would have complete control of the Meridian's edge and everyone aboard it. But escape wasn't really the problem. The problem was what would happen afterward. If she revealed her true capabilities, every government in the galaxy would learn that humanity had produced enhanced soldiers far beyond anything they had imagined. The fragile peace that had existed since the end of the war would shatter as alien civilizations realized they had been sharing space with a species that could produce living weapons of unprecedented capability. Other Prometheus veterans, including her Omega Series brothers and sisters, would become targets for capture, elimination, or forced recruitment. The lives they had built in the shadows would be destroyed, and they would be hunted across the galaxy. But if she didn't act, she would be handed over to military forces who would dissect every aspect of her enhancements and potentially use that information to create a new generation of enhanced soldiers. The Prometheus program had been disbanded for good reasons. The ethical implications of creating humans with such extensive modifications had troubled even its creators. Sarah sat on the narrow bed and allowed herself a moment of genuine emotion. For 15 years, she had successfully hidden among normal humans, using her abilities to help people whenever possible while keeping her true nature secret. She had saved lives in mining accidents, prevented crimes through her enhanced situational awareness, and provided assistance during natural disasters, all while maintaining the facade of being just another ordinary person trying to make her way in the galaxy. Now that quiet life was ending, and she would have to decide what Sarah Vanguard was going to become. 3 hours into her detention, the ship's alarms began sounding throughout the corridors. Red warning lights bathed the Meridian's edge in an ominous glow as Captain Morrison's voice echoed from the intercom speakers. All passengers remain in your quarters. We have detected an approaching vessel that has not responded to standard identification requests. This is a precautionary measure only. But Sarah's enhanced hearing picked up the conversations that passengers weren't meant to hear. Morrison and his officers discussing weapon signatures that indicated military-grade hardware, references to intercept protocols and hostile intentions. The growing realization that whoever was approaching the transport ship wasn't interested in following standard diplomatic procedures. Through the walls of her secure quarters, Sarah could sense the fear that was beginning to spread through the ship. The crew was trained for emergencies, but they weren't prepared for military confrontation. The passengers were civilians who had expected nothing more dangerous than a routine interstellar journey. Her tactical assessment protocols identified 17 different ways the approaching situation could result in catastrophic loss of life. Only 3 scenarios offered any possibility of protecting the innocent people aboard the Meridian's edge. All of them required Sarah to stop pretending to be someone she wasn't. Standing up from the bed, Sarah moved to the center of her small prison and began a series of careful stretches that looked like nothing more than someone working out muscle tension after hours of confinement. In reality, she was activating dormant systems throughout her enhanced physiology, bringing her combat capabilities online for the first time in over a decade. Her bone density increased as reinforcing compounds activated in her skeletal structure. Her muscle fibers realigned for optimal strength and speed. Her neural processing shifted from civilian mode to full tactical awareness, analyzing threats and opportunities with the cold precision of a weapon designed for war. The transformation was invisible to external observers, but Sarah could feel herself becoming something that normal humans had nightmares about, a Prometheus operative at full combat readiness. Outside her prison, the unknown vessel was closing fast, and its intentions were becoming increasingly clear. The Meridian's edge and its passengers were about to become collateral damage in someone else's war. Sarah placed her hand against the reinforced door of her secure quarters and smiled grimly. It was time for the galaxy to learn what humanity was really capable of when its people were threatened. The biographical verification was over. Now came the real test. The attacking vessel was a Kethmoran raider, sleek and predatory, designed for lightning strikes against civilian targets. Its commander, war leader HFY, had received intelligence about enhanced human assets being transported aboard the Meridian's edge and had decided that such prizes were worth the risk of attacking a vessel in neutral space. The Kethmoran had been humanity's enemies during the war, reptilian humanoids who valued individual combat prowess above all else. They had been particularly interested in capturing enhanced humans for study, hoping to unlock the secrets of human genetic modification for their own warriors. Civilian transport, you will surrender your enhanced passenger immediately. HFY's voice crackled through the Meridian's Edge's communication system. Comply, and the rest of your crew and passengers will be permitted to continue their journey. Captain Morrison stared at his tactical displays in growing horror. The raider was smaller than his transport, but it mounted weapons that could cripple or destroy his ship with ease. His own vessel carried only basic defensive systems, enough to deter pirates, but useless against military-grade hardware. "Sir, what do we do?" Jans asked. "If we give them the prisoner, they'll probably let us go. But if we refuse..." Morrison's military training warred with his conscience. He had sworn to protect his passengers, but handing Sarah Chun over to hostile aliens felt like a betrayal of everything he had served for. Yet if he refused, everyone aboard the ship might die. In her secure quarters, Sarah heard every word of the exchange and understood the impossible position Morrison was in. The Kethmoran were notorious for their treatment of prisoners, particularly those with valuable genetic modifications. If they captured her, she would face years of torture and experimentation before they finally killed her. But more importantly, she realized that this attack wasn't random. Someone had leaked information about her presence aboard the transport. The Kethmoran had known exactly where to find her and when to strike. That meant there were other forces at work, possibly including members of her own government who wanted her captured by aliens rather than risk her revealing Prometheus secrets. The tactical situation was clear. Morrison would eventually surrender her to save his ship and passengers. The Kethmoran would take her aboard their vessel for transport to their research facilities. And somewhere during that process, she would have an opportunity to escape, but only if she revealed capabilities that would expose the Prometheus program to galactic scrutiny. Sarah made her decision. The reinforced door of her secure quarters didn't explode outward. That would have been unnecessarily dramatic and potentially dangerous to nearby crew members. Instead, it simply opened as if the locking mechanisms had suddenly decided to cooperate. Sarah had used her enhanced neural processing to hack the ship's security systems, a task that would have taken expert computer specialists hours to accomplish. She moved through the corridors of the Meridian's edge like a ghost, avoiding detection by the crew members who were frantically preparing for boarding procedures. Her enhanced senses allowed her to map the ship's current status, power distribution, crew locations, structural weak points, and, most importantly, the exact position and capabilities of the approaching Kethmoran raider. Sarah reached the ship's communication center just as Morrison was preparing to respond to the alien's ultimatum. She appeared in the doorway so silently that neither the captain nor his officers noticed her until she spoke. "Captain Morrison, I believe I can resolve this situation, but I'm going to need you to trust me." Morrison spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm before he caught himself. Sarah stood relaxed and unthreatening, but something in her posture had changed. The slight uncertainty and deference she had shown as a civilian passenger were gone, replaced by the absolute confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. Ms. Chun, you should be in secure quarters, Yan said, but his voice lacked conviction. The fact that she had escaped from a supposedly escape-proof room without triggering any alarms was unsettling enough to make both officers reconsider their assumptions about their prisoner. I was in secure quarters, Sarah replied calmly. Now I'm here because those raiders aren't interested in negotiation. They're going to board your ship regardless of what you tell them, kill anyone who resists, and take whatever they want, including me, eventually, but not before they've had their fun with you passengers. Morrison studied her face and saw something that chilled him. The absolute certainty of someone who had faced such situations before and knew exactly how they would develop. What are you suggesting? He asked. Sarah moved to the tactical display and began calling up information about the Keth Moran vessel with a familiarity that suggested extensive military training. Her fingers danced across the control interfaces with practiced precision, bringing up weapon specifications, crew complement estimates, and structural analysis data. I'm suggesting that instead of surrendering to them, we take their ship, she said matter-of-factly. Their raider carries approximately 40 crew members, has moderate shields, and mounts weapons that are impressive against civilian targets, but vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic interference. Yan stared at her in disbelief. You want us to attack a military vessel with a civilian transport? No, Sarah corrected him. I want you to get close enough for me to board their ship. After that, the problem resolves itself. Morrison looked at the tactical readouts Sarah had assembled and realized that her analysis was far more sophisticated than anything his own officers could have produced. She wasn't just suggesting a desperate gamble. She was outlining a military operation with precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Who are you really? He asked quietly. Sarah met his eyes directly, and for the first time since boarding his ship, she allowed him to see past the civilian disguise to the trained weapon beneath. I'm someone who was created to fight aliens like these and protect people like your passengers, she said. The question is whether you're willing to let me do what I was designed for. Before Morrison could respond, the Keth Moran commander's voice filled the communications center again, this time with obvious impatience. Human vessel, you have 30 seconds to surrender your enhanced passenger. After that, we will board your ship and take what we want. Sarah looked at Morrison expectantly. Around them, the Meridian's edge seemed to hold its breath as everyone aboard realized that the next few moments would determine whether they lived or died. Morrison thought about his passengers. Mrs. Patterson with her stories of grandchildren, the young Altarian couple on their honeymoon, the junior engineer who was so excited about new drive technologies. He thought about his crew, good people who had signed up for commercial transport, not military combat. He thought about the oath he had taken years ago to protect innocent lives. What do you need from us? He asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it was the smile of a warrior preparing for battle. Just get me close enough to touch their ship, she said. After that, I'll show the galaxy why humanity survived the war. The scanner had tagged her as civilian, then reclassified her as an unknown threat. Now, as Sarah Vanguard prepared to reveal what the Prometheus program had actually created, the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous threat was someone willing to risk everything to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The biographical verification was complete. The real Sarah Chun was about to introduce herself to the universe.